If you love intense stories about betrayal, revenge, and emotional twists, you're in the right place. I'm sharing real and raw stories that will keep you hooked until the very end. Don't miss out, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to be the first to hear every new story. Your support helps this new channel grow, and I promise, the drama is just getting started. At the party, I saw my wife kissing another. I left and she was in tears the next morning. There are moments in life that split your world into two, the before and the after. For me, that moment happened on a warm Friday evening at a corporate networking event I didn't even want to attend. If I could rewind time, I'd have stayed home, poured myself a drink, and avoided the night that would change everything. But I didn't. I went. And I saw, she looked stunning that evening. Too stunning. Her black dress clung to her like it was made just for her. She walked into that room like she owned it, drawing eyes, smiles, attention. I used to love that about her, how she could command a room without trying. But that night, something felt off. Or maybe it was me. Maybe I was already sensing what my mind couldn't yet accept. I stayed near the bar, nursing my drink, watching her mingle with strangers. I told myself it was nothing. Just business. Just networking. She was friendly. Social. Charming. That's what people liked about her. But then I noticed how often she was with one man. A guy I didn't recognize. Tall, confident, laughing at everything she said like he was auditioning for her attention. Still, I brushed it off. Until I couldn't. The party buzzed with shallow conversations and overpriced drinks, and the walls felt like they were closing in. I stepped outside for air, hoping to shake off the strange tension clawing at my chest. I walked around the corner of the terrace, and that's when I saw it. She was leaning against the railing, her face far too close to his. His hand rested casually on her waist, and her head was tilted back, laughing that laugh. Not the one I knew. This one was softer, flirtatious, intimate. It wasn't the kind of laugh you shared with just anyone. And before I could take another step, it happened. He leaned in, and she didn't move. She didn't pull away. She didn't hesitate. I stood there, rooted to the ground. My mind raced to find an excuse, a logical explanation, something, anything to stop the reality from sinking in. But it was undeniable. Clear as the moonlight that framed their betrayal. I felt it then, my pulse pounding, my breath caught somewhere between fury and disbelief. I should have stormed over, should have demanded answers. But I didn't. I turned around, walked back inside, grabbed my coat, and left. No words. No confrontation. Just silence. I spent that night driving aimlessly, my thoughts spiraling into darker places. The betrayal wrapped around me like chains I couldn't shake off. Every mile I drove, every memory I replayed, added another weight to the realization that the woman I loved had betrayed me. By morning, I was numb. Cold. Detached. I wasn't ready to face her, but I knew I had to. I pulled into our driveway just as the sun was beginning to rise, and for a brief second, I wondered if she'd even notice I was gone. But when I opened the door, there she was, sitting at the kitchen table, a mug clutched in her shaking hands. Her eyes were red, her face streaked with tears. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice cracking. I stared at her, feeling the last thread of patience snap inside me. "Where was I?" I repeated, my tone sharp, biting. "Where were you?" The color drained from her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out, and for a second, she just sat there, wide-eyed, trembling. "It wasn't what it looked like," she finally whispered. "I had too much to drink. I wasn't thinking." "I'm sorry. Sorry." The word echoed in my head, hollow and meaningless. I didn't yell. Didn't break anything. I just stood there, silent, letting her words fall around me like ash. Watching her try to cover a wound that was already bleeding too deep to hide. "Do you have any idea what it's like," I said slowly, "to watch the person you trust most throw it all away?" She sobbed, her hands covering her face. But I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. "I need time to think," I said, turning my back and walking out. Leaving her there. Leaving her to sit with the weight of her choices, but I wasn't just thinking. I was planning, because some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness. And hers was one of them. The silence of that morning lingered long after I left the house. I drove without direction, letting the road stretch ahead of me, endless and uncertain, much like the thoughts that churned inside my head. I kept hearing her voice, that fragile, trembling apology that meant nothing. I kept seeing her face, streaked with tears, eyes wide with fear, or maybe it was guilt. I didn't care which. It was too late for tears, too late for apologies. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and I wasn't the kind of man to ignore it. I wasn't going to be the fool she thought I was. That kiss, that moment on the terrace, wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, And choices come with consequences. I knew I couldn't let it go. I couldn't let her explain it away or pretend it was just some drunken lapse. I needed the truth, the whole truth, and I needed to be smart about it. So I started where anyone would when betrayal whispers in the dark. I made a call. Private investigator. Discreet. Professional. The kind of man who didn't ask questions about morality, only logistics and payment. When I explained my suspicions, he didn't hesitate. He'd heard it all before. I sent him a recent photo of her and asked him to dig into her recent activities. I wanted details, texts, phone records, hotel bookings, anything that would reveal how deep the betrayal ran. But that wasn't all. There was more to protect than just my pride. Over the years, I had trusted her with parts of our lives that now felt dangerously vulnerable. Our finances, our shared plans, the future we had built together. That trust felt like a mistake now. So, while the investigator started his work, I took steps of my own. I moved money from our joint account into a private one. Quietly, carefully. Not theft. Insurance. If she could betray me once, she could betray me again. And if divorce became inevitable, I wasn't going to be caught unprepared. She wouldn't blindside me twice. By the time I returned home that afternoon, I had already put the first pieces of my plan in place. I walked through the door, bracing for confrontation, but found her exactly where I'd left her. At the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around that same mug, though the coffee inside had long gone cold. She was on the phone, her voice low and trembling. I heard my name, caught fragments of sentences. I don't know what came over me. He's furious. I didn't mean for it to happen. Lies, half-truths, weak attempts to rewrite what I'd seen with my own eyes. She hung up quickly when she noticed me, wiping her eyes and forcing a weak smile. "I'm glad you're home," she said, her voice hesitant, as though testing the waters. I didn't answer. I walked past her, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and settled on the couch, switching on the TV. Sports, background noise, something to drown out the silence between us. She hovered nearby, clearly waiting for me to say something, but I didn't give her the satisfaction. Let her stew. Let her wonder how much I knew, how deep my anger ran. Later that evening, she tried again. She sat down beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her body but distant enough to keep from touching. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. Her voice shook, though I wasn't sure if it was fear or hope. I turned to her, keeping my expression cold, unreadable. "About what?" I asked, though I already knew. "About last night," she whispered. "About us." I let the silence stretch, let her feel its weight. "You made a choice," I said finally, my voice low and sharp. "You made your bed. Now lie in it." "It wasn't like that," she pleaded. "It wasn't. He's no one. A mistake." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "No one? You seemed comfortable enough with no one." Her face crumpled, but I didn't stop. I wasn't ready to let her off the hook. I stood, towering over her. "Tell me, is this the first time? Or just the first time I caught you?" "It was a mistake," she insisted, her words tumbling over each other. "It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated. "Funny. It looked like it meant plenty to me." She reached out then, desperate, trying to grab my hand. "Please," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'll do anything. Just, please let me make this right." I pulled my hand back sharply, stepping away from her. "You can't make this right. You broke it." And then I left. Again. But not out of anger. This wasn't aimless like the night before. I had a destination this time. Upstairs, to the bedroom. To the drawer I hadn't opened in years. Inside I found it. An old folder. Divorce papers I'd once considered during a rough patch in our marriage. Back then I'd decided to stay. To fight for what we had. But now I wasn't sure it was worth saving. That night, as the house settled into uneasy silence, I sent a message to the investigator. "Let me know what you find. The sooner, the better." The reply came back quickly, simple and professional. "Understood." She didn't come to bed that night. I heard her crying downstairs, soft and broken, but I didn't go to her. I didn't comfort her. I didn't care. She wasn't the victim here. She was the one holding the knife. By morning, my plan would be in motion, and there would be no going back. Because this wasn't just about betrayal. It wasn't about one kiss. It was about every lie, every secret, every moment that would never be the same again. And if she thought her tears could fix it, she didn't know me at all. Morning light crept through the curtains, casting a pale glow across the living room. I found her there, curled on the couch beneath a throw blanket, eyes swollen from a night spent crying. For a fleeting moment, pity stirred inside me. It was instinct, muscle memory from years of loving her. But I crushed it. She wasn't the victim. Not in this story. I moved to the kitchen, filling the silence with the sound of brewing coffee. The aroma filled the air, warm and familiar, a sharp contrast to the Cold War unfolding between us. She stirred awake, her movements slow and cautious, as though afraid she might set me off. "Morning," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Hesitation laced her tone. Fear. Maybe even hope. I didn't answer. Just poured my coffee, sat at the table, and waited. She joined me moments later, sitting across from me, her hands wrapped tightly around her mug like it was the only thing holding her together. "I know I messed up," she began, her voice trembling. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." I looked at her then, really looked, letting her see the steel in my eyes. "You think this is something you can fix with apologies?" I asked, my voice low, cold. "Do you even understand what you've done?" Tears filled her eyes again, but I didn't stop. I wanted the truth. I wanted to hear her say it. "Who is he?" I demanded. "Don't lie to me." She hesitated. It was slight, but enough. Enough to tell me that whatever she said next would be a lie. "It was nothing," she said, her voice barely holding steady. "A stupid mistake. I barely know him." I laughed, sharp and humorless. "Barely know him? Do you always kiss strangers at parties, or was this some special occasion?" She opened her mouth, but no words came. Just a quiver of her lip, a fresh round of tears. I stood, towering over her. "You're lying. And when the truth comes out, you'll regret not telling me now." I didn't wait for her response. I grabbed my keys and left. The door slammed behind me, the sound echoing through the house like a final verdict. I didn't care where I was going. Anywhere but there. By midday, my phone rang. The investigator. His voice was calm, clinical. Detached in the way only a man who'd seen too much betrayal could be. "I've got something," he said. "Your wife's been in contact with a man named Kyle Bennett. Frequent texts, some late-night calls. And there's this," his voice dipped lower. "A hotel receipt from last week. Booked under both their names." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Confirmation. I'd known it deep down, but hearing it aloud cracked something inside me. "Send me everything," I said, my voice flat, emotionless. Cold. An hour later, the email came through. Screenshots of messages that weren't just flirty but intimate, gut-wrenching. Late-night calls lasting hours. Whispered secrets, jokes shared when they thought no one was listening. And then there it was, the receipt. A hotel booking, both their names printed clearly. Proof that it wasn't just one drunken mistake. It was calculated. Planned. Betrayal dressed in silk sheets. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the evidence. Every word, every timestamp felt like a blade. I wanted to scream, to tear the house apart. But I didn't. I'd given her a chance to be honest. She'd chosen lies. Now she'd face the consequences. When I returned home, the scene was almost laughable. She was in the kitchen, fumbling with a pan, attempting to cook. She rarely cooked. She never had to. And the fact she chose now, of all times, to play the remorseful wife? It was pathetic. Desperate. "What's wrong?" she asked, turning toward me. Her eyes were hopeful, but I could see the fear behind them. She was still clinging to the idea that this could be fixed, that one meal could erase everything. I didn't answer. Instead, I placed my phone on the counter, opened the email, and slid it toward her. "Does this look familiar?" She glanced at the screen. The color drained from her face. Her lips parted, but no words came. Just a ragged breath, the kind people take when they're trying to survive a moment they know is about to destroy them. "I can explain," she whispered. "Explain." I snapped. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. "Explain what? That you've been sneaking around with him? That you've been lying to my face every day?" Tears spilled over, but I didn't care. I didn't feel pity. Just cold, hard rage. "You told me it was nothing. A mistake. But this was planned. Deliberate. Disgusting." I was confused, she cried, her voice breaking. "I didn't know what I wanted." "You didn't know what you wanted?" I barked, stepping closer. "You wanted him. And you got him." She collapsed onto a chair, sobbing. Her shoulders shook, her hands covering her face. She looked broken. But I felt nothing. Just a hollow satisfaction that the mask was off. The truth laid bare. I've already contacted a lawyer, I said, my tone flat, final. You'll be hearing from them soon. Her head snapped up, her face streaked with tears. No, she pleaded. Please. Don't do this. We can fix this. There's nothing to fix, I said, shaking her off when she reached for me. You broke it. And now I'm going to break you. I left her there, a sobbing mess on the kitchen floor. Upstairs, in the quiet of our bedroom, I opened my laptop and started drafting the next phase of my plan. She thought her tears would save her. She had no idea. I was just getting started. In the days that followed, she tried. Oh, how she tried. Cooking meals she'd never cooked before. Leaving sweet notes, little apologies scribbled on scraps of paper. It was almost comedic how she clung to the hope that this could be salvaged. It was too late. Far too late, she asked about counseling. Therapy. Anything to patch the cracks. I gave her nothing. Cold, clipped responses. Barely looking at her. She didn't deserve my gaze, but my plan wasn't done. Emotional devastation wasn't enough. I wanted her world to crumble. I wanted her to feel the humiliation she had poured over me. I reached out to her employer. A boutique marketing firm that prided itself on family values. Attached to an anonymous email, I sent screenshots. The worst ones. The ones where she mocked me, where she bragged about her little secret trysts. Where she joked about sneaking out during work hours. I didn't need to wait long for the fallout. 2 days later, she came home, eyes wide and haunted. She dropped a cardboard box on the table. Her office belongings. Her career, now as broken as our marriage. They fired me, she sobbed, collapsing into a chair. They said my behavior, it wasn't professional. I watched her crumble, her face buried in her hands. And I bit back a smile. That's awful, I said flatly, brushing past her to grab another beer. She didn't know it, but the final blow was coming. And when it landed, it would be the one that shattered her completely. The day I handed her the divorce papers, the air in the house felt heavier than it ever had before. She was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, her eyes hollow, her spirit broken. The cardboard box from her office still sat untouched on the kitchen table, a constant reminder of how far she had fallen. I dropped the envelope on the coffee table in front of her, the sound loud in the silence that stretched between us. She flinched at the noise, her eyes darting to the envelope like it might bite her. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it, slowly peeling it open and pulling out the papers inside. Her face paled as she read the words, her breath catching in her throat. No, she whispered, her voice cracking. No, please. Jake, we can fix this. I almost laughed at the desperation in her voice, at the way she still clung to hope like it was something she could control. Fix what? I asked coldly. You destroyed this marriage the second you let another man into your life. You killed it the moment you kissed him, the moment you lied to me, the moment you decided I wasn't enough. Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't care. Not anymore. She had earned every drop. You're really doing this? She asked, her voice barely audible. You're really ending this? I nodded, my expression unreadable. Of course I am. And you're going to sign those papers, or I'll make sure every ugly detail of what you've done becomes public knowledge. Your friends. Your family. Everyone will know exactly who you are. She stared at me, her hands trembling, but she didn't argue. She couldn't. She knew she had no ground to stand on. No defense to offer. She could only cry, her sobs echoing through the room. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I wanted her world to collapse in on itself, the way mine had. And I knew exactly how to do it. I sent a message to the one person who deserved to know the truth as much as I did Kyle's wife. Her name was Lauren. I'd looked her up, found her on social media, traced her connections. I wasn't sure what she'd do with the information, but I knew she deserved the truth. I invited her to coffee, choosing a quiet place, away from prying eyes. When she arrived, I saw it immediately. She was composed, poised, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. She already suspected something. She didn't know what, but she knew enough. I didn't waste time. I laid it all out, every detail, every betrayal, every lie. I showed her the screenshots, the hotel receipts, the text messages that left no room for doubt. I expected anger, maybe even disbelief, but she didn't flinch. She read every word, every line, her expression unreadable. When she finally looked up, her eyes were cold. Thank you, she said simply. I didn't know for sure, but I do now. There was no emotion in her voice, no crack in her composure. But I saw it in her eyes. The fury, the devastation, the betrayal. If there's anything you need, I began, but she shook her head. "I'll handle this," she said quietly. "Trust me." I didn't know what she had planned, but I could see it in her gaze. Kyle wouldn't walk away unscathed. And that was enough for me. The day she moved out was quiet. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic confrontations. She packed her things in silence, her eyes hollow, her movements slow. She didn't cry. Maybe she was too exhausted. Maybe she'd run out of tears. She stood at the doorway for a moment, her suitcase by her side, her hands trembling. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, but in the end, all she managed was a whisper. "I loved you." I met her gaze, my face hard, unmoved. "No," I said coldly. "You loved yourself. And now you're reaping what you've sown." She flinched, but she didn't argue. She knew better. She opened the door, stepped outside, and for the first time in weeks, the house felt still. Peaceful. I watched her walk to her car, watched her load her bags and drive away. No more pleading. No more apologies. Just silence. When the door shut behind her, I poured myself a drink and sat on the couch. I stared into the glass, letting the moment sink in. I had lost a marriage, yes, but I had gained something far more satisfying. Justice. She thought her tears would save her. She thought apologies would undo what she had done. But there are some betrayals that can't be forgiven, some choices that can't be undone. And she had made hers. For the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. No tossing, no turning. Just silence. Just calm. The storm had passed, and all that was left was the wreckage. But it wasn't my wreckage. It wasn't my ruin. I'd survived. And I was stronger for it. Days passed. Then weeks. I heard through mutual friends that she was struggling. Lost her job. Moved into a small apartment. Rumors spread. Whispers of the affair. Of how it ended. People talk. They always do. But I didn't care. Her reputation wasn't my concern. Not anymore. I had my life back. I had my peace. And that was all that mattered. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It isn't violent. Sometimes it's quiet. Calculated. Cold. And sometimes it's served by simply walking away, leaving them to drown in the mess they created. She thought I'd be the fool. She thought I'd stay. But she underestimated me. She underestimated how much strength there is in silence. And in the end, that's what destroyed her. Not the affair. Not the exposure. The silence. The finality. The knowledge that there was no coming back. And now I could finally breathe again.